When a train guard learns that his application for promotion has been rejected, he thinks his night can't get any worse. However, he soon realizes he's wrong, for he and several train passengers encounter something dangerous on the tracks. One night, Alpha Trax train guard Joe Griffin goes to the Waterloo station for work. Unfortunately, he learns through a letter that his application for the post of supervisor has been unsuccessful. Then, Joe can't believe that his colleague, David, is the new supervisor, and the man informs him he'll be on the Eastborough Red Eye. Aboard the train, Joe announces to the passengers what time they'll reach their destination. He then starts checking the tickets and gets startled by an elderly lady's dog. At the same time, Joe encounters a problem when one of the passengers, Kate, fails to show her ticket. So, Joe charges her the full fare before proceeding with the ticket inspection. Afterward, Joe's mood changes when he sees the trolley lady he likes, Ellen. Joe asks Ellen to have a drink with him after work, but the lady says she has another shift in the morning. A bit embarrassed, Joe just lets Ellen carry on serving the passengers before sitting by the train window. As it rains hard, Joe can't help but notice the full moon. Then Joe wakes up from a nap moments later when the train stops after hitting something on the line. Joe sees a passenger, Adrian, helping Ellen with her trolley, and he gives the man the keys he accidentally dropped. Meanwhile, the driver goes out to see what they hit on the tracks. Joe helps the other passengers, Jed and Jenny, and he tries to calm down a panicking girl, Nina. He also checks on the other people on the train, Billy and Matthew, and when he realizes the driver is outside, he uses the intercom to apologize to the commuters for what happened. Outside, the driver discovers they hit a deer, so he tries to remove it, but he gets distracted when he hears a noise from behind. Unfortunately, it isn't long before something attacks him, and everyone on the train has no idea about what's happening. However, Joe soon decides to look for the driver, and when he doesn't find him, he instructs Ellen to keep an eye on the commuters. Worried, Joe looks for the driver outside but finds no trace of him. Then, Joe eventually closes the train doors, not realizing they're being watched. With no other choice, Joe finally calls for help and learns that the emergency team will arrive in 4 hours due to signal failures and trees down the line. Of course, the passengers are unhappy, and they only get distraught when they find out the driver is missing. As Joe and Ellen try to defuse the tension, Adrian suggests walking to the next station. However, Joe points out that they must stay on the train and wait for assistance, saying those are the rules. He also refuses to open the doors for the commuters, but eventually he lets the passengers go outside and form a line. After that, Joe closes the doors and guides the commuters along the tracks. At the same time, he can't help but feel annoyed as Adrian tries to get close to Ellen. Unfortunately, the passengers have no idea they're in danger. As the night deepens, the commuters continue to travel along the tracks. Joe makes sure to stay on foot, looking back once in a while to see if they're still complete. Sad to say, something is following them, and it's hiding behind the trees. Moments later, Joe notices movement from a distance. However, he just ignores it and continues walking, but after a few seconds, the passengers get distracted when they see the bushes moving. Jenny thinks it might be the driver, so Joe tells them to wait for him as he investigates. Ellen then follows Joe, and that's when they find the disemboweled body of the driver. Finally realizing they're not safe, Joe runs with Ellen and leads everyone back to the train. Then, a wolf howls from afar, so the passengers rush to get back inside the train. Sadly, Jenny's leg gets stuck between the train doors, and the wolf outside bites her before letting her go. Seeing the old woman bleed, the passengers help carry her and tend to her wound. Ellen washes her wound and attempts to stop the bleeding, panicking and admitting she doesn't know what she's doing. Meanwhile, Adrian asks Joe to check the doors, sending the train guard in a hurry to lock them. Unfortunately, something bangs on the train. The commuters do their best to keep quiet as they hear the train being scraped from the outside, and as it turns out, they're dealing with something much more dangerous than a wolf. Then, seconds later, Joe says whatever attacked Jenny is gone, allowing the passengers to breathe a little. As Jenny cries in pain, Adrian tells the others they have to take the old woman to a hospital. Ellen says they need to call someone and tries to get Joe's attention, but the guy is too disoriented. Despite that, Joe manages to get on his feet and tries to call for emergency assistance, only to be disappointed when nobody responds to him. At the same time, Billy asks Joe if he's okay, suggesting they get the engine started. Joe then says he doesn't know anything about trains, but Billy reveals he's familiar with engines. Billy tells Joe they have a fuel leak, adding that the line must have spilt when they crashed. He also says there might be some left in the tank, but without pressure, they won't be able to restart the train. As if that isn't bad enough, they're unaware that the antenna on the train roof is broken. Moments later, the passengers discuss what they should do. Joe tells them they have no other choice but to wait to be rescued, but Jed is worried about Jenny and says she needs medical attention. Of course, it doesn't sit well with Adrian that they're just a train full of bare bait. Nina then points out that bears don't howl, making Ellen wonder if the animal that bit Jenny was a wolf or a dog. Finally, Jenny speaks and reveals that the creature that attacked her was more like a man. The passengers find it hard to believe Jenny, but she insists it wasn't an animal. Then, Kate asks Joe what happened to the driver, but before he can answer, a noise distracts everyone. Realizing the noise is coming from inside the train, Joe takes a fire extinguisher and decides to find the source of the sound. Billy follows him without hesitation, and the reluctant Adrian soon goes after them. Adrian then takes the fire extinguisher from Joe as they reach the next car, where they discover another passenger, Paul, hiding in the restroom. Afterward, Paul joins the other commuters and learns about what happened. At the same time, Adrian realizes there's no signal on the train, which makes him even more upset. But all they can do is wait, and Jenny's wound starts getting worse. Meanwhile, Kate checks on Nina and assures her Jenny will be fine. Then, Kate talks to Nina about her daughter to distract the girl. But the creature soon returns and tries to get inside the train. Eventually, Nina's phone rings, and when she answers it and realizes the caller is her mother, she quickly asks for help. However, Nina can't understand her mother because of the poor reception. So she walks back to get a signal, and that's when the creature breaks the window and grabs her. Kate desperately attempts to save Nina, but the creature takes the girl to the roof and brutally kills her. Then, the passengers move to the next car, and Adrian secures the doors with a belt. Kate refuses to leave Nina and tries to go back for her, but Joe and Matthew stop her. As their situation worsens, Adrian blames Joe for wanting to sit and wait. The passengers just continue to panic, so Jed talks to them and says they should at least make it harder for whatever's out there to catch them. Then Jed asks Joe if there are any tools on board, and a few minutes later, the commuters arm themselves and barricade the train. Once the work is done, the passengers remain quiet and hope the creature won't return. Kate and Ellen help Jed tend to Jenny, and when Jed leaves to get a bottle of water, the old lady asks Kate if she has any children. The two women talk about some personal stuff, but Jenny starts coughing soon. Concurrently, Adrian approaches Joe and says the creature will come back. Joe tells him it might have had enough, but Adrian is sure it will return for more. Then, Adrian implies using the weak passengers to escape and live, saying it's survival of the fittest. Meanwhile, Jenny throws up blood and loses some of her teeth. Joe also notices that Paul is missing and searches for him, and Adrian immediately barricades the train car. Eventually, Joe finds Paul in the restroom, but the guy struggles to open the door. Then, the creature breaks the roof and gets to Paul, violently killing him and leaving Joe terrified. With no time to waste, Joe tries returning to the other car but fails. Sadly, instead of helping Joe, Adrian removes everything blocking the train doors and prepares to leave. However, he soon realizes that Joe has the key, so he is forced to help the train guard before the creature kills him. The passengers quickly barricade the car doors, and they can only hope that that's enough. Unfortunately, the creature soon breaks into their car. The creature walks toward Joe and contemplates eating him, but Ellen stabs it with a sharp object. Enraged, it hits the trolley lady and sends her flying to the other side of the train. Then, Joe stabs the creature with a crowbar, and that's when the other passengers help to kill the beast. To make sure the creature is dead, Matthew repeatedly strikes it with an axe. Matthew then tells everyone that the beast is a werewolf, and Kate notices it's wearing a ring. As they try to understand what happened to the beast that was once a man, Matthew points out that a bite might have caused its mutation. As if on cue, Jenny suddenly groans and they can only look at the old lady. Moments later, Jed starts talking about the Thornton Forrest rail crash. According to him, the night express came off the tracks, and when the emergency services got to them, there was no one left to save. Some of the bodies were half-eaten by animals, but nobody found out what really happened. Now, Jed has an idea of what occurred on those tracks years ago. At the same time, the werewolf they thought was dead suddenly gets up and cries. So, Joe finishes the job by bashing the beast's head in with a fire extinguisher. But their problem isn't over yet, for the other werewolves around the area hear their kin's call for help. Also, Jenny is starting to turn into a werewolf. Determined to survive, Adrian prepares to kill Jenny. Naturally, Jed stops him and says his wife is only sick, but Adrian points out she's infected. The others also prevent Adrian from going near the old woman, but they eventually fail to subdue him. Adrian immediately tries choking Jenny, and upon seeing this, Joe punches him and instructs the other commuters to tie the guy down. Sadly, Jenny needs to be restrained too. Later on, Billy decides to find and fix the leak to get the train moving. Matthew takes the axe and offers to be his lookout, and then Joe instructs Kate to keep an eye on Adrian. After that, Billy teaches Ellen the train controls and tells her what to do once he patches the leak. Using the intercom, Joe apologizes to the passengers for the delay and says they'll do whatever it takes to survive. Then, Billy and Matthew finally go outside to find the leak, and once they see it, Billy quickly tries to fix it. Inside the train, Kate and Adrian realize they've met before in a job interview, remembering that things didn't go well between them. Meanwhile, Jed worries as Jenny's condition worsens. Kate is sure Jenny will be fine once she gets to the hospital, but Adrian wants to kill the old woman before it's too late. Outside, Billy does his best to patch the leak while Matthew goes into the forest after hearing someone calling for help. Unfortunately, Matthew soon realizes that Nina is still alive and that she's the one calling him, but he also sees a werewolf feasting on her body. Frightened, Matthew flees and tries returning to the train, but the other werewolves catch up to him and eat him. The rest of the passengers realize what's happening, and Jenny continues to transform as she hears the howling of the werewolves. At the same time, Billy finally fixes the leak, so Joe and Ellen prepare to get the train moving. But the werewolves surround the train, leaving Billy with no choice but to hide. Then, Ellen panics when she sees the werewolves and operates the train, ignoring Joe's protests. Because of that, Billy is forced to hold on to the bottom of the train as it moves, while inside, Jenny eventually becomes a werewolf. With their lives in danger, Kate decides to untie Adrian to help restrain Jenny. However, the old woman easily hits Adrian and he ends up kicking Kate out of the train when a werewolf grabs her. Then, Kate begs the werewolf not to eat her, but of course, that doesn't stop the beast from killing her. Back on the train, Adrian hits Jenny with a wrench to help Jed, but the old man only gets mad and punches him. Eventually, Jenny brutally kills her husband before coming after Adrian. Then, the power goes out again when Billy accidentally touches the hose with a leak, making Joe and Ellen realize something is wrong and causing them to check on the commuters. Luckily, Joe kills Jenny with a pipe before she can hurt Adrian. However, the werewolves finally get on the train, so Joe, Adrian, and Ellen barricade themselves in one of the cars. Then, Adrian attacks Joe with a pipe when the guard suggests going into the woods, and he doesn't hesitate to hit Ellen too. The two men engage in a physical fight, forcing Ellen to use a sharp piece of metal to subdue Adrian. Pissed, Adrian traps Joe and Ellen before taking the train key and fleeing. Then, 3 werewolves surround Joe and Ellen, but Billy shows up and uses a torch to send them away. Billy gives Joe a crowbar to open the doors while he deals with the beasts, but as he's about to escape, one of the werewolves grabs him. Despite that, Joe and Ellen run into the woods as fast as they can and ignore Billy's screams. Unfortunately, the werewolves relentlessly chase them, and Joe soon realizes they won't make it. He then kisses Ellen and decides to sacrifice himself, giving the woman he likes a chance to get away. Ellen can only sob as she leaves Joe, who tries his best to fight off the werewolves. However, Joe still ends up getting bitten. Meanwhile, Ellen finally reaches the next train station, and she's able to keep Joe's nameplate. At the same time, Adrian looks for a way out of the woods and comes across Joe, who is now a werewolf. Adrian realizes he doesn't stand a chance as the other werewolves surround him, but it isn't long before the beasts feast on his flesh.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.